Okay, hello. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Happy Friday. Uh, Um, just while people are getting their seats, I'll share that I was supposed to be here last night and my flight was canceled. So I took a 5 a.m. flight from New York City this morning. So if anybody, I hope I absorbed all the bad travel karma and then you all can make it home very smoothly. Okay, so welcome to day three of the fifth edition of EMO. Thank you so much again to the organizers, General Chair Mike Hamilton, University of Pittsburgh, and our sponsors, ACM, SIGCHI, and SIGCOM for making this possible. And it is my very, very great pleasure to be able to introduce our keynote speaker for today, Professor Catherine De Ignacio. She is an associate professor of urban studies and planning in MIT's DUSP, the Department of Urban Studies and Planning. There, she directs the Data and Feminism Lab, which uses data and computational methods to work towards gender and racial justice, particularly as they relate to space and place. D'Ignacio is a scholar, an artist, designer, and hacker mama who focuses on feminist technology, data literacy, and civic engagement. You might know her through her many, many endeavors from hackathons such as Make the Breast Pump Not Suck Again hackathon, her platforms such as Data Basic, books such as Data Feminism or Counting Feminicide, or her art, which has been exhibited in places including the Venice Biennial and ICA in Boston. So with that, I look forward to hearing from Catherine about world making in techno-fascist times. Thank you so much.
Okay. Oh, wait, this is not going to work for water. Um, so yeah, first of all, huge thank you to the organizers for the chance to be with you all today here at EMO. I wanted to go last year, and in fact, a student of mine went to the conference last year, but I was unable to go. And so this is my first in-person EMO conference. It's very exciting to get to be here today. Today, I'm going to be speaking about some of the major problems with the current configuration of AI and AI hype and AI systems. And I'm going to use a case study from my latest book to illustrate some possibilities that we have for changing course through world making, which I'll define sort of, but and it sounds big because it sounds like we're making worlds. But the TLDR is that world making smart starts small. Okay, so first a land acknowledgement. I just want to thank the Wampanoag Nation and the Massachusetts peoples on whose lands I'm usually a guest and on whose lands I completed most of the work that I'm speaking about today. Okay, so in coming to this talk, I was sort of like, how much bad stuff should we talk about? I think we're inundated with bad things right now, everywhere from the technology and AI landscape, but also just like a kind of overall political authoritarian landscape, both here in the US and in other places around the world as well. So this is my bad stuff slide. And I think after this, what I want to do is shift to talking about where do we go? But so I want to take a moment to talk about this current moment of corporate AI hype, because this is the water that we're swimming in if we are people that create technology or do data science or work with AI. These are the waters that we're swimming in right now. And so one of the most important things that we lack right now in relation to AI specifically is powerful and captivating imaginaries about how life with technology could be different. So corporate AI hype tells us a lot of things. It tells us we need enormous foundation models. Corporate AI hype tells us only elite men at elite institutions can understand this technology and speak on its behalf to Congress. AI hype tells us we need to redirect scarce natural resources to feed computer farms to train our enormous models. AI hype tells us we are in an arms race, so we must tolerate our creative works being stolen without consent and ingested and sliced up into billions and billions of tokens and vectors. AI hype tells us we must allow our cultural heritage to be used for war, militarism, and genocide. AI hype wants to automate teachers, librarians, libraries, HR staff, social workers, urban planners, content moderators, software developers, and pretty much every other type of worker out there. Corporate AI hype assures us that big tech has got everything under control. And AI hype tells us always that generalized artificial intelligence is just around the corner. But I just want to say none of this is actually true. And none of this is inevitable, even though the picture that is always painted is that this is inevitable. This is now the reality that we have to work within. But that is actually not true. And so I've always been inspired. This is a kind of old quote, turn of the century, from Arundhati Roy. And she writes in this short collection of essays, she says, "Another world is not only possible, she is on her way. On a quiet day, I can hear her breathing." And so if you don't take away anything else from this talk, this is the summary of it. This is a TLDR. And I think what this quote is about our responsibility to engage in world making. And for me, what that means, and I think maybe for some of us, what that means is to envision and realize alternative, more sustainable, and more just approaches to technology. So what does this mean? What are we talking about when we're talking about world making? What am I talking about there? So sometimes world making is not making wholly new worlds, which sounds hard, right? But sometimes world making is simply about making space for the coexistence of difference and different worlds. So for example, in his book, Design for the Pluriverse, Arturo Escobar talks about this idea of the pluriverse, which comes from the Zapatistas, where it's encapsulated by this idea of a world where many worlds fit. The feminist scholar Shefali Milzarek Desai talks about the courage to live fearlessly with and within difference. And in fact, when Black feminist poet Audre Lorde gave her famous Master's Tools speech, and you all are probably familiar with this quote, "The Master's tools will never dismantle the Master's house." She wasn't actually talking about like a specific tool in that speech. What she was doing was she was encouraging her fellow scholars and writers and poets to forge community and solidarity from their differences, from their racial differences, their class differences, their cultural differences, and so on. And she actually said, "We have been taught either to ignore our differences or to view them as causes for separation and suspicion rather than forces for change. Without community, there is no liberation, only the most vulnerable and temporary armistice between an individual and her oppression." Oops, I just have to move the Zoom thing so I can see this. Hold on. Hide floating meeting controls. There we go. I got it. Thank you. Oh, there. Got it. I think that I understood that. Yeah. Okay, sorry. So without community, there is no liberation, only the most vulnerable and temporary armistice between an individual and her oppression. But community must not mean a shedding of our differences, nor the pathetic pretense that these differences do not exist. So I want to assert that building data and technology, and I would say models, any kind of like technological output, building any of these things can be a form of world building together. And so hopefully I want to tell you a couple of stories and show you a couple of examples to illustrate what I mean by this. Okay, so our first story is this one. The quote that's up top here is a quote from a reviewer that I'm going to talk about. So this is a piece that Lauren and I talk about in Data Feminism. And so this is from the chapter that's about embracing pluralism. And we discussed this. This is a data mural project. It's by Rahul and Emily Bhargava, and it was created in 2013 in collaboration with an urban farming group called Groundwork Somerville in Massachusetts. Who had approached the Bhargavas because the organization was in the process of, like, they had acquired this particular site for their first urban farm. They wanted to both develop the site, but also involve youth and galvanize the community around this idea of food sovereignty and growing one's own food in urban space. And so the Bhargavas go under this name of data therapy, which I love. And so they work together with the organization. They pulled together data from a number of sources, demographic data from the city, GIS data on vacant lots, and then internal data from the small nonprofit organization that included things like growing records, food donations, and attendance logs at community events. And then they worked with youth. So there was a program to work with youth, to teach them about data, and to review and analyze the data they had collected and engage in story finding and storytelling. And then so by the end of these sessions, the youth had actually sketched the overall outline and iconography of the resulting mural here. And so read from left to right, the mural frames this overall problem. A guy is grasping for a basket of veggies, but it says, healthy food is hard to get. And then they show data that backs up that claim around the cost of healthy food, the number of the people in the community with prediabetes. Other data show the number of unused lots in the city, the amount of land that was reclaimed for urban farming. And then the next section depicts Groundwork Somerville, a truck from them bringing affordable produce to the neighborhood, and includes the fact that it employs over 400 youth residents. And then the data mural ends with this vision for a unified and healthy community, which says, together, live in better. And so when we got back the first reviews on data feminism, we had an interesting note from the reviewer, and it said this, like, oh, sure, great. Like, this is a nice feel-good community project, but this is not data science. And I was surprised at this comment. I mean, maybe I was surprised or not surprised, but I felt that the reviewer hadn't actually understood what Lauren and I were trying to articulate about data science. We were not actually saying this is like a nice feel-good example of community, although it actually is that, of course. But actually we were discussing it as a challenge to the whole idea of data science. The narrow definition of what counts as data, the narrow definition of who counts as a data scientist, and the narrow definition of where data science can happen. And so for us, we felt this project was proposing and enacting a whole other world than the one we are living in most of the time. Sorry, hold on. So I think this is the question to pose to our projects. And I think this could be an interesting and productive question to ask about your own projects or to ask about other projects, is what is the world that is being proposed? So in this case, I think, again, with this small scale community feel-good project, which many people, I think, in academia or other places would dismiss as being too small, too applied, or too whatever to sort of count. What is the world that's being proposed? It's a world where data science can be done by youth and by urban farmers. It's a world where small data are meaningful and important. It's a world where data bring people together to engage in collaborative meaning making and storytelling. And it's a world that celebrates communities taking action towards food solidarity or to food security. So there's a whole world, there's a whole theory, there's a larger vision embedded in what one might be inclined from academic training to dismiss as being too small and too unworthy of some kind of other consideration. So another world-making project, which actually was mentioned in the intro here, it was in the form of a hackathon. And so I don't know how many people here know this particular building that is being depicted, but it's the MIT Media Lab. And this is where I was studying as a student, and I was working here when I had my third child, baby, my little baby girl. Um, and so this is an award-winning gem of architecture. But despite this, it left very few places for breast pumping and breastfeeding for new parents. Basically, it's because of the whole concept of this building is transparent glass sight lines. So it's all about glass. um, there's literally no privacy anywhere in this space. um, and so I came together, frustrated by this. I was like, listen, we're like at the center of like supposedly the future. Like, does the future have no babies, no parents, no mothers, no breastfeeding? The future has none of these things somehow. So through conversations with other students and other parents and collaborators in the lab, we decided to transform that space. And we decided to make it so that it focused on research and design for the phase of life that we found ourselves in at that current moment, which was birth, pregnancy, postpartum, and breastfeeding. So we staged a hackathon, and we called it the Make the Breast Pump Not Suck Hackathon. Actually, who knows what a breast pump is? Okay, we've come a long way. I used to ask that question. Like, when I asked that question, like 5 years ago, like very few people raised their hands. Okay, I'm glad you all already know. And so we wanted to stage an event that would not only just focus on the pump as like an object, which is a clunky, chunky, sort of terrible object. There have been improvements actually, but we also wanted to stage an event that would challenge the system. It would hack the system that stigmatizes breastfeeding, the system that pushes women and parents back to work too soon, and it creates buildings that are for some bodies and some stages of life, but not for other bodies and for other stages of life. And we also wanted an event that would center the parents that face the most barriers to breastfeeding and postpartum care instead of those who faced the least barriers. So here's a picture of the scene. We had teams who created new products for breastfeeding, for chest feeding, for pumping. We had teams who hacked family leave policy. We actually had a whole kind of track that was about family leave policy in the US. We had teams who created educational resources for parents and communities, and we had teams who architected new visions for lactation spaces. And it's really hard to describe the energy. And it was just for a weekend. It was this like kind of temporary, sort of felt like an occupation of the Media Lab space. And there was this buzzing and loving energy at the event. And I've thought about it and I sort of experienced it as a temporary kind of utopia for parents, babies, women, families of all kinds. So if the world were actually designed for breastfeeding and pumping parents and babies and their friends, this is sort of what it would look like. And it was also just really beautiful to see a kind of really cold, minimalist academic space being completely taken over by babies. So that was wonderful. So yeah, so again, to ask this question is to say, like, what is the larger vision? What is the larger world that is being proposed by this project? In the case of the Make the Breast Pump Not Suck hackathon, the world is a multiracial and queer-friendly world. It's a world where pregnant and breastfeeding bodies are celebrated. It's a world where it's normal to nap in the middle of the day. So we had a napping room, and at any moment, the kids can go nap there, but also the parents and the caregivers and friends and whoever is also welcome in the nap room. It's a world where the needs of women, families, and children are at the center of research and design. And in this case, the world was temporary. It existed just for this one weekend of activity, but it was real. For that brief moment in time, it was real and it was transformative. And it was transformative for many people involved, including myself. And so it points to this idea that it is possible. You kind of don't really realize how hostile our spaces are and our worlds are until you create the world that you actually want to live in. And then you realize, wow, it could get so much better than it is right now, you know? Okay, so here I want to tell a second story, and it's maybe a little bit long, so bear with me. This is a story that is about a debate, and it's about a debate about breakfast, inclusive AI, and the end of capitalism. So earlier this year, and I don't see anyone who was with me at this particular event, but there could be people in the audience who are at this event. So I was at a small gathering of researchers, and there were researchers from both academia and industry, and they were from around the globe. And our whole charge in coming together from the organizers was we were thinking about culture and inclusion, and we were thinking about generative AI in particular. And so we were discussing the problems with outputs from generative AI systems. And someone gave the example of breakfast. And so if you say to like ChatGPT or a large language model, what should I eat for breakfast, or what should my breakfast look like? Show me a picture of breakfast. You know, more often than not, you get what you would expect. You get a response tuned for a Western, Anglo, North American, white point of view. Rather than, let's say, a Korean breakfast or a Kurdish breakfast or another kind of breakfast. And so there's really clearly colonial dimensions to this, right? And they have to do with where the owners and the bosses of the technological infrastructure are, and who those people are, and where the data are from. And so where we debated was around what should be done about the breakfast problem. So to make the breakfast more inclusive, one camp of people, which we will call group one, they thought that countries and communities and ethnic groups around the world should make all of their breakfast available for ingestion to AI systems. So give over all the breakfasts to Google, to OpenAI, to Anthropic, or et cetera. And because of those large corporations who are running the large language models and other generative AI systems, if they just knew about all the breakfasts across all space and time, then we could really solve this breakfast problem. And everybody could get the exact right breakfast that is tuned just for them. On the other hand, the other side of the debate, we had another group, and that included me. And in our group, we thought that the idea of this one giant corporation ingesting all of the breakfast of the world was itself a very kind of colonial and extractive proposition, and there should be an entirely different informatic infrastructure upon which our supposed breakfast problem could be solved. So for example, we could have small breakfast models customized and administered and owned by their creators, not by the corporations. We could have community run and community owned breakfast servers. The servers could be federated, they could talk to other nations, they could talk to other communities, they could share the breakfast with each other, but the breakfast would be shared with consent. There would be maybe some breakfast sovereignty. And then no corporation would profit from the large scale collection of breakfast any longer. And so the group one, which we can call the big data breakfast group, maybe, the group one, they actually did like our idea. They were like, these are not bad ideas. But they said reorganizing the AI infrastructure is completely impractical. And you guys are dreamers. And listen, we cannot wait until the end of capitalism to make AI inclusive. And like, you know, removing big tech from the center of generative AI at this point is basically like we'd have to end capitalism to make that happen. So the group one is like, we just have to do this more practical thing of collecting all the breakfast data for Google immediately. And then we can make some breakfast benchmarks, and then we can test if like the correct breakfast is being outputted at any given moment in time. Okay, So I'm telling the story for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's a completely fake problem. And I don't know what sent us down the path of talking about breakfast so much about this particular at this conference, because I actually don't think that we human beings need AI systems to tell us what to eat for breakfast. But if we can set that aside for a minute, I think there are some kind of important points to be considering about the approaches to how we wrestle with like very large scale and structural problems. So in second place, it was a little bit hard for me, I will say, and we don't have anyone from group one here, so it would be interesting if anyone wants to take the group one position. But it's hard for me to understand why group one thought that collecting all the breakfast of all the cultural groups of all of the world was a more practical task than ending capitalism, because to me they seem really kind of on par with each other as tasks. Like these are both like really kind of possibly tractable, but really probably very hard long-term tasks. But then third, I wanted to tell this story because I also don't think we have to wait for transformative change to create worlds where that transformative change has happened. And that's actually the main issue that I take with the group one, saying to us that, you know, and we can't do this until capitalism has ended. I actually don't think that's true. We don't have to wait till the end of capitalism because there are already many non-capitalist, anti-capitalist, open source, commons-based, community-based models for us to follow. And just to remind you of that quote that I said at the beginning, Arundhati Roy says, "Another world is not only possible, she is on her way. On a quiet day, I can hear her breathing," which is to say that we bring those worlds into being. Every time we take action in the world, we bring certain worlds into being. And we have that agency, and we don't have to wait till somebody else solves all the problems for us. So I want to tell you about one of my own AI experiments in this regard. Um, so I was living in Argentina in 2019, and I was working on the revisions to data feminism. And I started meeting people who were engaged in feminicide data activism. This is a kind of form of citizen data science where activists, journalists, nonprofits, students, many kind of different types of actors are trying to count and log cases of feminicide, gender-related murder in their locale. And this is a really, we had an example of this in data feminism, the work of Maria Salguero, and that's kind of what set me down the path of talking to and interviewing more of these folks. And it's an incredibly widespread form of basically citizen data science, especially in Latin America. And so in the process there in 2019, I met the lovely people that you see here. And now they have become collaborators and friends on this rather sprawling research and design project that is called Data Against Feminicide. So they are Isadora Cruchen, Silvana Fumega, and Elena Suarez Val. And this project started in 2019, and we're still going really strong. And we have many kind of interesting ways the project has branched out. And so that's, I guess, almost now 7 years. There's many people that have been involved along the way. And so we have, the project overall has these 3 pillars. We're a qualitative research project that is about data activism. It's about the citizen data science that is being done about gender-based violence. We're also a participatory design project, and that's mainly what I'm going to be talking about today. And then we're a growing and a global community of practice. So we convene virtual events every year for data activists and data advocates to share tips and tools and strategies with each other. And so the project really began first as qualitative research, but first really just because we had observed, and actually Elena is one of these feminicide data activists, and there were so many of these efforts in so many places, particularly in the Americas, but there's also a number in Europe at this point, and we recently finished a collaboration with a group in Kenya. So that it's a really interesting spread of a spreading form of sort of like citizen data science. Yeah. So this is a map of the groups that we interviewed and we collaborated with. Where you see orange is the collaborators. So these are the folks who participated in a kind of a co-design of technology process. But initially, we weren't designing technology together. Initially, we were just talking to people and doing interviews. And we asked these groups about their motivations for doing this work. It's often not remunerated. It's incredibly challenging work. It's basically they're human rights defenders. They're logging human rights abuses. We asked them about their theory of change, their sources of information, their categories, their process, their labor, including their emotional labor, and their political outcomes. What have they been able to achieve with these data that they produce? And it's through those interviews and conversations and the beginning of the community events that the idea of co-designing digital tools arose. So here's a little bit about the participatory design process. I'm not going to talk through sort of everything, but I do want to highlight two things that we did that I think, again, are world making. They are modeling the world that we want to see elsewhere, not only in our own projects, but everywhere. And so the first thing I want to highlight is our first couple of steps, and really just step number one that we said when we being in dialogue with the activists, we said, should we build anything? And already this is a departure. And this in particular is a departure for how AI tools and technologies are happening right now, how they are unfolding in the world. Nobody is asked, nobody gives consent, nobody gives input. We are not invited into that process in any way whatsoever. And that's a problem. And so in this case, we modeled the world that we would like to see, which was we would like to be asked. We would like to have the option to not do something sometimes. Sometimes it might be better not to automate something, right? And so already this is kind of a very different technology development process. And then the other thing I want to highlight here is the number 3. That we worked with activists once it became clear that and I'll explain a little bit more about what we built, but once it became clear that we were building a system that was going to rely on machine learning classifiers, we worked with activists directly to do data annotation of news articles, which we then used to train our models. And these annotation sessions were actually incredible. They were spaces of democracy, deliberation, debate, contention, and they were focused about coming to consensus about what counts as a case of feminicide and what does not, because actually this is a social and political and legal concept. There is not one kind of like correct definition of feminicide that one could like formalize into a system. And so we had to kind of run this process. And in a sense, what we did is we trained our classifier to think like a feminist activist. Okay, so what did we do? The first tool that we built was relatively simple, and it was designed to facilitate activists scanning news articles. This is like their primary data source, is they just manually sort of like read many digital news articles about cases of feminicide, and they are looking to extract information. They want to pull out specific details about cases from news articles. So this is a browser extension called the Data Highlighter. It highlights names, places, and dates, which are very commonly kind of these pieces of information that activists want, along with then custom words. So there's an option to put in custom words. So as an example, many groups track gun-related violence. So they might put gun or weapon or something like that into the custom words. A lot of groups also track the relationship between the victim and the perpetrator. So they might put something like husband or boyfriend or something like that in there. So that's for that stage of sort of like information extraction. And then the second tool that we built is much more of a system or a platform. And so each day the system scans news from a particular geographic region. It surfaces news articles about cases of feminicide there. And it passes the relevant articles along to activists via email alerts. It's basically kind of like glorified Google Alerts, but more tuned, and then a dashboard. And activists evaluate cases to determine if they meet their criteria for inclusion in the database. So there's a human element of review before an official case gets counted or included. Um, One of the main design goals for this was to really reduce the amount of extraneous violence that activists are exposed to, and because they're exposed to so much. The articles are horrendous to read. You're reading really brutal details about violence. And one of the things that was happening, especially with Google alerts, is that activists were getting delivered a lot of violence that was not actually feminicide. So it's violence that matched their keyword searches, but not actually what they're interested in. So one of our goals was to kind of reduce that and filter that out. And so that's where the AI as a machine learning classifier comes in. And so it's on the back end, a machine learning classifier is scoring articles to try to determine whether or not they describe a case of feminicide. And this is where it applies that feminist definition of feminicide that was forged from those participatory data annotation sessions. Um, and then there's this really interesting moment in the design process where we were discussing what we might build. So before actually like building this system, we were kind of discussing what should the features be, what should the functionality be. And in that conversation, we offered to the activists, in the case where the model's like pretty sure that this article is about feminicide, we could automatically extract relevant details about that case, and we could just put those in a spreadsheet or in a database or something like that. And so our thought in proposing that is like, yeah, we can try to save you guys some time, try to save some of that emotional labor that you are putting into each of these cases. Um, but then there's this really interesting moment of our conversations where the activists said no. They said, no, we don't want to do that. We don't want to pursue this more automated or fully automated way of compiling feminicide cases because we see our labor as witnessing this violence. We see our labor as caring for the women whose lives are affected by it. And we see our work as collective memory work. And so there was something really important to them about they are present. They are stewarding memories of people that might otherwise be forgotten and not connected to this broader structural phenomenon of feminicide. So they said, for us, this is not appropriate for automation. And so we didn't do it. But that's not a path that we pursued. Um, okay, so in any case, there's now around 65 human rights groups around the world who are using these tools, 4 different languages, Spanish, English, Portuguese, and Swahili. And then using the data that they gather with these tools, the groups themselves, not us, the groups, produce policy reports, they offer services to impacted families, they advocate for legislative change, and they do large-scale art installations and really kind of creative methods of communication and protest. So again, we can ask, like, what is the world that is being proposed by this project? And so the world here is a world where ending violence against women is prioritized and it is infrastructured. And I don't mean that in a massive way, because we are just a kind of team of researchers and we're pooling funds from our institutions and trying to make this happen. So we're not operating at the scale, of course, of like a government who can set laws and policy. We can't infrastructure at that scale. But we are saying we have a certain amount of resources at our disposal. Where do we choose to place those resources? What worlds do we choose to place those resources in service of? So we are making priority decisions. We are making infrastructural decisions, and we are choosing to support that world, the vision of that world. A world where consent, democratic participation, and deliberation are central to building technology. I feel like I can't emphasize that enough when, in so many ways, our methods for democratic participation in technology are being, or just have been completely removed from the play space or the game space of whatever's happening right now with AI. A world that values small contextual models for discrete tasks, where we're not always imagining that more data is better or that bigger models are better. I think these are traps. It might actually hold true in certain cases, but before we just jump all on board, what are essentially traps for centralizing and hoarding capital, I see, like, what can we accomplish with small models? What can we accomplish with local context? What can we accomplish with like kind of very like kind of task-based orientation? I would like us to kind of come back to some of the more visionary things that preceded the current moment in AI. Then a world where we build power and AI infrastructure outside of profit. We're not doing anything for money. We give the tools away for free. We're trying to keep the projects alive through grants. That's getting a lot harder right now in the current political climate, but we'll try to figure it out. But we are operating in outside of the structure of the economic structure that says the most important thing is quarterly reports to shareholders. We choose to operate outside of that. That's a choice we can make, and that's a choice I think some of us here can make. Not all of us, maybe, but some of us can make that choice. Um, and then this is a world that supports and sustains existing labor. It doesn't seek by default to automate labor. It doesn't seek by default to replace labor. It seeks to understand what are the automatable places? Where are the places that the activists do want efficiency? Like, they don't want to be reading a bunch of violent content. They don't have time, you know? Like, there are places here for data and technology. There are places here for AI. But understanding what are the right places can only happen through dialogue. And so always going in and assuming that we want to automate everything seems, again, it's a trap. It is a trap to get us all to think like bosses and to expend the people that we will leave in the wake. Okay, so to come back to that debate about the end of capitalism, again, I already said this, but my answer is we don't have to wait for the end of capitalism to do something that is non-capitalist or anti-capitalist or outside of capitalism. We don't have to wait for the future where all women are living lives free of violence to work on making that world real or envisioning that world or practicing that world in a particular space, in a particular time. And we don't have to wait for the future where our undocumented neighbors can live in peace without fear of being kidnapped off our streets. This is another kind of deep form of human rights violation that is happening all across this country right now. We don't sit around and wait. We make the world where that is not happening. We make those futures by making those worlds right here and right now. And this is actually what's one of the things that, these are dark times. These are hard, dark times that we are living right now. But one of the places where I personally am finding the most hope is actually in my local community and in Massachusetts more broadly. There's this huge I don't know, proliferation of mutual aid groups, community defense networks, and they are protecting the most vulnerable members of their community. Even just in my own town, my neighbors and myself, because I'm participating, are rejecting dehumanization and scapegoating in favor of love and generosity. We're protecting neighbors from kidnappers, we're feeding people, we're comforting children, and we're supporting families. And these are also world-making efforts. In that case, they don't involve much technology other than signal, I guess. But these are also making these worlds. They are producing a world where all neighbors belong equally, and where we defend each other and where we care for each other, even in the face of cruelty and state violence. And so I learned this term recently. I was in dialogue with the artist Mashinka Hakopian, and I was reading some of her work to prepare for the conversation with her. And I don't know if these are her concepts, but I read them in her work. And she was talking about these ideas of defuturing and unworlding. And I think this, more than anything, is what both the corporate AI hype and also the kind of confluence of technology with fascism are doing to us right now, they are removing possible futures from our path. They're removing possible worlds. They're defuturing, they're unworlding, and they're telling us that only one world is possible, and it's their vision. And so sort of stealing our ability to see ourselves in the future in the way that we want to be in the future. And so I think this, for me, is why these forms of world making, no matter how small they are might be actually the most important thing that we could be engaged in right now. Oopsie. So yeah, just to wrap up, I just wanted to invite you all. Our next Data Against Feminicide event is on next week. It's on November 12th. There's a bit.ly link there if you want to register. It's all about feminist AI. So we have a really amazing program lined up. We have Anita Gurumurthy in conversation with Paula Ricarte, who runs a feminist AI network in Latin America. And then we have project presentations by Patty Pena from Chile, Joan Quinoa from the Data Labelers Group in Kenya, which is all about data work and data workers. And then Data Against Feminicide and the Disco Lab, which is based at Brown, are going to be presenting about a really interesting project that's about combating stigmatizing narratives around violence in the news. So yeah, please join us for that conversation. And then just thanks for your time and attention. There's many ways to be in touch and follow work and so on and so forth. And I look forward to your questions. Thanks.
We'll come around with microphones. Thank you so much, Dr. Ignazio.
Thank you. So I want to live in a world where small amount of data can make narrow capability models, which do great on the task we want them to do. But it seems like so far with deep learning, like it's just a fact of the algorithms we have that more data and more general models seem to do better. So how do we cross this gap and move towards sort of models which achieve all the aims we want?
I mean, I just wonder if, you all can tell me, I think a lot of you in this audience are computer scientists, but I still wonder if this idea of enormous models that do everything is actually what we need to be working on or whatever. And if those are the algorithms that we need to develop, and if that's the way, because it's also a way that is, it's making for a lot of devastation as well. And I'm seeing more from the environmental perspective and more from the data centers perspective. One of the things that's been very interesting to me is the amount of pushback against data centers that is now happening globally as people's awareness is being raised and their consciousness is being raised about it. And so, again, it's sort of why, maybe there are some purposes. I'm not going to totally foreclose the idea that maybe there are reasons why enormous models might be useful. But why couldn't we also just continue to focus on specific tasks with specific data sets, which also, again, there's something about the process that feels really important. The process of producing small models, curated data sets, also allows you to engage in a deliberative and democratic process around what these things should look like. When we say that a large language model meets everybody's needs all the time, forever, for every task, I think we're doing a great disservice to all the people whose needs it's not meeting and who we are not in dialogue with because we say we just don't have time because we just need to build more data centers. You know what I mean? And so I feel like there's some major costs and externalities to that path. And the costs, as we are seeing, to me, the costs are to democracy. And I do mean that in a very in a weighty sense, because that's why I put technofascism as part of the title of the talk. I think we are the current configuration of technological infrastructure is undermining our democratic systems, along with other things. It's not the only thing, but anyway. But I don't know. Do you have ideas? I guess I would kind of put it back to you all who are building models and things. Yeah.
Yeah, probably would take more time than is appropriate. So thanks.
Yeah.
Speaking over here, chair left. Thank you for your talk today.
It's like,
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for your talk today. I really appreciate it and have a lot of different thoughts and questions. I was wondering if you could elaborate on your view of the anti-capitalist motivation. I was thinking of your group 1, group 2 slide, and under my abstraction of the world, anyone could do anything unless if you can procure the resources to do so. And with large language models, I see this as a infrastructure problem, compute and energy problem, and then organization of talent to make things happen, and organization of the investors. So I see a very big positive feedback loop of the investor class in that direction. I don't see that precluding other opportunities, though. So I'm wondering where you see kind of that conflict between the herd going in one direction versus prohibiting other views.
yeah, I think I didn't think, so I sort of disagreed with the group 1 position that we needed to end capitalism to pursue this path of like smaller models and more sovereignty and kind of community owned infrastructure. That was something that they felt that big tech could only be decentered by ending capitalism. I think that's at least what they had said. And I don't entirely agree with that. So, I mean, I think it's possible for those things to coexist, but I think what you're pointing out is correct in the sense that so much money right now is being poured again into this like one path and this one vision, which is like the one centralized corporate enormous vision. And I think, again, it's at the expense of creating a healthier ecosystem. I mean, people have also talked about like things like algorithmic monoculture, but I think we also have like infrastructural monoculture, you know? And ultimately, I think that is not healthy. It's not sustainable for either people or the planet. The only thing it's sustainable for is for like the companies, maybe they're getting rich and their shareholders. But I do think you're posing an important question, which is like, how do we fund the alternative vision? And that's what I don't have an answer to, especially when like, you know, they're like NSF is now like, we can't use the word historical or whatever in our grant proposals, you know, especially when like sources of funding to even explore such things appear to be being foreclosed. So yeah, again, I might put that out to you all, and I'd be interested to hear what you think about that. But I think it's an important question because obviously, like, we can't always all be doing everything for free. It does cost money. It's infrastructure. Infrastructure costs money. So yeah.
Thank you. This is really interesting and yeah, really interesting to hear all of the stories you shared. I'm curious about being in a planning program or an urban studies program and sort of how that maybe uniquely or not affords you to do some of these kinds of projects.
Yeah.
And then also more specifically thinking about the second story you shared, I was wondering if you could go into a bit more some of the challenges with the deliberative and participatory process you described,
Sure.
and maybe the challenges with both the technical aspect versus the more participatory community engagement aspect and how you kind of navigated both of those.
Yeah, those are great questions. Yeah, I've been really grateful to be in an urban planning department. It's actually, it's not my training that I ended up there. My training, and you know, I have worked as a software developer for a long time. I was also an artist and designer. And for me, those things always came together in data visualization and maps. And so I've done a lot of work over the years with maps, mapping, cartography. And that's sort of the reason I ended up in an urban planning department. And I teach our GIS and spatial analysis classes. But one of the things I'm really appreciating, anyone else here is an urban planner? Oh, you are everybody. Okay, great. I've like now fallen in love with planning. And the thing that I love about it is very aligned for me with a kind of a sense of civic service. It's an orientation as a discipline that it has, and it's also a pragmatic orientation. And that also aligns really well with the types of projects that I do, which are often called applied in academia, But I think but planning is a space that values that type of work, and that also has a kind of a methodological diversity that permits. I mean, we have everybody in our department from like urban historians to economists to transportation engineers to super quantitative folks to economists to, there's just the methods run the gamut. And because there's such methodological pluralism, no one's methods are like better than other people's. And so often I think in disciplines we see methodological hierarchies like, oh, quantitative methods are better than qualitative. What even are those methods anyway? And so no one's there to like police me from a methodological standpoint, and I appreciate that. But so I think there's some freedom that comes with that. That said, I also did a very like traditional and conventional path to tenure, which is I wrote 2 books. And so like I did not try to make the academy see, I don't know, participatory technology projects as tenurable. I chose a kind of more conservative way of being legible to the institution, which also I think was important. So, and then your second question about the participation and the process. Yes, there's so much I could say. So groups don't all agree with each other about definitions of feminicide. So there are legal definitions of feminicide, not here in the US. We don't have that as a legal concept, but in the majority of Latin American countries, there is actually a law on the books that has a definition for what constitutes feminicide. Those laws are different from each other. And actually the activists often work with a more expanded definition of feminicide than the law does. And that's why I say we train the classifier with a more activist orientation. It has a more expansive view, whereas the state might define feminicide more narrowly. Like sometimes some laws, for example, say it's only when a woman is killed by her intimate partner, which activists would challenge that as the only scenario. But then on the technology side, so that's like one of the that's one of just the complications, is that people don't agree with each other and the concept itself is contested. But one of the things that arose in the back and forth with the groups, we actually wrote a whole paper about this, is one of the things we found was initially our models were working really well. So the articles that were being surfaced to the groups were working really well, but they were working really well only for the groups that were monitoring all feminicide. And then there are some groups that monitor racialized feminicide. So they monitored like missing and murdered women and Indigenous women and girls, for example. Or another group in the US was looking at Black women killed in police violence. And for those groups, the first model completely failed. It did not meet their needs because it was getting all this broader universe of cases, but it was unable to be tuned for the specific kind of form of violence that they were interested in. And so we had to go back to the drawing board, and that's what we ended up writing the paper about. That was work led by Harini Suresh and Raj Mova, but they ended up coming with an alternative strategy of supplementing the first pass model with additional both negative and positive cases. And again, worked really closely with the groups to source those data to be able to train it so that it wasn't throwing up. I mean, the first version of it was terrible for the groups because they were just being inundated with irrelevant stuff. It was actually the exact opposite of what we had wanted in the development process. But so that's one of the examples, that like, it's not like, it's not like it was all happy roses and we did everything perfectly, you know? And I think actually that's one of the things that we need to talk about more with participatory and grounded work is we need to talk about the points of friction, tension, when things didn't work, like what do we do about it? Also, how do we fund it? How do we keep like having money to continue the conversation? All of that. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much for what you do. I agree with you that probably one of the best ways of countering these effort to predict only one vision of the future is to maintain alive and give dignity to the experiences of local communities. I wanted to ask a question about the system that you developed, especially about in many societies that are very masculist, let's say, yeah, masculist. They do not, let's say, talking in CS terms, they do not label feminicides as such. So my question would be if you've witnessed whether through your tool you managed to detect, or whether you've thought about detecting crimes that eventually would meet basic labeling of feminicide that were not labeled as such. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, the speaker's over here, so I was having a hard time understanding, but your question is whether we would look at trying to detect feminicide in places where maybe they don't use that
Exactly.
term. Is that the
Yeah.
question?
And maybe, you know, like, I don't know, thinking about some patriarchal society, even in Italy, in the South, you would have feminicide, but they would be justified in the eyes of society as justified crimes for some honor, for example, you know, this kind of
Oh,
things.
honor
For
crime.
example.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so Italy is actually a really interesting case. In Italy, there's a huge anti-feminicide movement right now.
Yeah.
Of the European countries, it's probably the one that has the strongest movement against feminicide, which has been really interesting. And we've ended up being in conversation with some of the folks from there a lot. Although our tools don't yet work in Italian, but yeah, I think it's an interesting question. Wait, sorry, say the question again.
So basically, oftentimes in many cultures, it happens that
Oh, the honor
crimes,
killing, honor killing.
but that's just an example.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Crimes that we would label
I
as
see.
feminicides in the basic terms, like
Yeah.
are not labeled as such.
Yeah. Okay, yes. So feminicide, I didn't in this talk have time to go through the kind of feminicide as a concept, but as a concept, it comes from feminist theory and thinking and feminist writings and scholarship. And what folks have used it to push back on is all of these ways in which gender-based violence is normalized. So this would be things like honor killings or victim blaming. We see this, we see this all the time in small ways in news articles, for example, where the newspaper interviews the neighbor of the guy who killed his wife, and he says, and they say, oh, he was such a nice man or whatever, So all of these ways in which the violence is normalized. So I think what you're saying around, yeah, in countries where it is more tolerated and normalized, there are still, in most places, not all places, but there are still groups that are working on these issues. So even like in places with honor killings, for example, there's an amazing Jordanian journalist. I'm not going to say her name because I'm going to get it wrong, but there's an amazing Jordanian journalist who's been doing an incredible amount of both reporting and sort of advocacy in the Arab world around this idea of honor killings. So for us, in terms of like our positionality in relation to that, we would never and this is carefully how we positioned the project. Like, we would never try to, like, from afar monitor news in another country and then say this is what's happening with feminicide there. First of all, because it's too far away and we are not experts in that context, probably. Second of all, because one of the things we learned from interviewing activists is they're deep experts in their media ecosystem. So they're the ones who know semantically what are the key words that are being used to talk about feminicide. And those are different in different places. Even in the same language, those can be different. And so you really need like a partner on the ground if you're going to try to monitor from news. But so we would always wait to be invited to collaborate with somebody. And then, like, we just finished a collaboration, for example, with Femicide Count Kenya, because they were really interested in adapting the tools into Swahili. So we worked with them on a project to do that it took about like 9 months or so. And so that's how we would enter that space, basically. And we wouldn't try to do it from afar. And I think that's, again, I want to say that is a really intentional decision based on colonial power dynamics of academia. And I would never, there's actually a part of my most recent book where I write a little bit about like the project I could have done, which is like MIT professor creates global database of feminicide around the world. Like, I could have done that project and I could have made claims about it. But that's not, that felt deeply colonial and also disrespectful of the work that people are doing on the ground and the knowledge. Like, they're the experts. I would not the expert of their world, but I can support their vision. And so I think really it speaks back to that, like, what are the worlds that we are modeling? Like, I want to model a world where our tools and our technology are forged through a democratic process, and we support the vision of the people who are the closest and who also have the most expert knowledge of any given situation at hand. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ignacio. We'll move to a coffee break now and see you all after that.